Hey guys, this is Kenjido, and welcome to PaintShop Pro. So today I just wanted to start off the whole series with a video that covers just some foundational stuff. Primarily the idea that a pixel, which is the foundation of all the images, whether vector or raster or photographs or however you want to look at it, they're all just made of pixels, and that this pixel is represented by data. And this data you can think about as the amount of light filling a bucket. So a pixel can be thought of as like a bucket of light, and that within that bucket there's sub buckets that represent the color components like red, green, and blue. And so it's that concept that we want to explore further. If you're already familiar with how pixels work and how the data is represented in them, that essentially there's luminance values going from 0 to 255, that the components of the color are represented in red, green, and blue elements, and that's an additive color system rather than a subtractive color system. If you're familiar with all that, you can probably skip this video and jump straight ahead into one of the more specific tutorial and example photos. But if these are terms or ideas that you're not really familiar with, or you've kind of wanted to learn a little bit more about, stick around because we're going to go through some specific examples of what all those details are. So let's take this example image to kind of nail down the point of light buckets and the way those values get depicted in an image in PaintShop Pro. So right now we're looking at the full image. So as you can imagine, it's going to be, it's of size 2078 by 3117. So it's a pretty dense picture. It's a high resolution picture. If I change up here the zoom to 100%, essentially meaning that there's a one-for-one match between the pixel on my monitor as it's displayed and the pixel in the image. But even at this level, looking at it, it still looks pretty good. It still looks like a photograph. You don't really see the individual pixels, but as we start zooming in, we start to see what's called pixelation, where you start to see the individual squares or individual pixels that make up the image. And so then as we look in here, you can see there's a good gamut of pure white, pure black, and all the grays in between, and we can get a better understanding of that by clicking on the color picker tool and then just scanning the image. So you can see, we have values going all the way up to 250 and values that are completely black, which are 0, and all the different levels in between. Now, since this is a grayish or gray image, and you see that the color picker is displaying red, green, and blue values, that a gray color is always represented by equal amounts of red, green, and blue. So here you'll see this is a pure grayscale image, so no matter where I move the color picker, the red, green, and blue are the same. So once again, think of the each pixel as being a light bucket, and that light bucket has a range, and that range is from 0, meaning pure black, to white, pure white, which is 255. So this changes a little bit once we start looking at a color image. So now if we take the same image and we look at the color once again, and we do the same activity of zooming in 1-to-1, but then zooming in further, and once again we can see these pixels, these individual buckets of light. And now when we use our color picker, you'll start to see that color is represented now by these individual red, green, and blue values on each of these boxes having different numbers. And you can think of it as different levels of red, green, and blue. Now, one thing to consider is that this is an additive color system. So an additive color system means the more of each color that you add together, the brighter and closer to white you're going to get. So you can see, I've got a lot of red, green, and blue here, and it's a very white color, and I have very little red, green, and blue here, and a much very darker color. And the way colors combine in an additive color system is not intuitive to the way that we think of paint, for example. So when we're talking about a subtractive color system, we're talking about combining colors as if we were working with paint. And one of the key differences between a subtractive color system versus an additive color system is that subtractive is all based on what light is, or what colors are absorbed and what is reflective, whereas additive means we're just combining what's being emitted, right? So when we think about paint and we think about subtractive colors, you can think about the key examples of, if I took a red and I had a red splotch on paper, and then I combined it with green, if I mix those two colors paint-wise, I'm going to get something like brown, right? In the same way, if I did a similar example where I took red, once again, and I combined it with blue, if I mix those, you'd expect to get purple, right? And so if I, you know, instead of those being enveloped in my example here, if I just paint them separately, you can see how, just by looking at them, that's obviously brown and that's obviously purple. So to get a better idea of the additive color system, let's go ahead in PaintShop Pro and click on one of the materials and switch to the color tab, if you will. And in the color tab, bring up the sliders. And what you'll see is we have 3 different sliders for those same sets of colors, the red, green, and blue. And as we start playing with these, you'll start to understand the relationship. So by comparison to the subtractive color system, when we combined red and green fully, really bright reds and greens, we came up with brown. But when you look in the additive color system, by maxing out red and green, you end up with yellow. So instead of a brown, we've got yellow. Now, if we do the same comparison with blue and red, instead of ending up with this nice dark purple, we have magenta. And so perhaps you've heard of the cyan, magenta, and yellow primary colors. That's where these come from. It's the max of combining all the different red, green, and blue combinations. Now, again, additive color system, when you max out all the colors, you end up with white. And conversely, if you bring all the colors down to 0, meaning essentially no light for any of those colors, as you would expect, you're going to get black. One other tech thing to note, you'll notice that down here in this HTML panel, the numbers change as you change all the sliders. And this essentially represents the data, the actual data value that most programs use to represent color. If you do any type of GUI development for software, or in this case, it's referring to it as HTML codes for web pages, when they're trying to display color, use this type of nomenclature. And essentially, really how it breaks down is that each 2 numbers represents one of the colors, and it goes in the order of red, green, and blue. So if I zero out blue and green, you'll see that the only 2 numbers that are not 0 are the first 2. And as I move the slider around, only those first two numbers change. If I slide the green around, you'll notice that only the second 2 numbers change. And if I slide the blue around, only the last 2 numbers change. So for the average user, you won't need to really be messing with this or need to understand this number. But what's more important is just understanding the relationship of how a single pixel's color and luminance is represented in this way. Okay, so why does this matter? What's the value, or apart from the fact that I may be mentioning it, where does this kind of stuff come into play? So there's at least 2. The first one, I would say, as you're learning how to use some of the tools that are in PaintShop Pro or any image editor, really at that, you'll notice that these numbers will show up. And I think it'll give you more meaning if you can understand what these numbers are, that they're not just arbitrary, end points for something, but that as you look at a histogram, for example, and we'll cover that in a different video, that essentially, you see that this really represents that full range of luminance values that we talked about, right? And this is kind of a grayscale representation, and they really kind of lay it out for you here that, 0 is dark, white is light, but that as you're moving your sliders around, really what you're doing is now saying, well, all these pixels that are over here, I want them to be fully white. And you can even see that in the image as I'm moving this around, that as I slide this down, that more and more pixels are becoming, if I hit OK and use my pick tool, more and more of those pixels now are becoming absolutely pure white. And that's what we're doing by using that tool. So really one of the main ideas is simply better understanding how these tools work, how the tools in PaintShop Pro works, how the adjustment tools work, how blend layers work, how color and effects work. It's just getting a better foundation of understanding what you're doing. So the second main idea is that having this knowledge will enable creative new ideas or new capabilities. And really, you take the foundation, these foundational things like pixels, you build it into using tools better, and that once you've established this base knowledge, you can take two different things that you fully understand, for example, that are simple and easy to understand, and create something new. There's a lot of, if we look around, a lot of different examples of this. If you take something as simple and well known as a wheel, take something as simple and well known as a chair, you put them together, you get a wheelchair. You take something as simple and well known as a phone, and you take a computer, you put them together, you get an iPhone or a mobile phone. Take ball bearings and plastic, and well, you get the idea. So, in this context, what are the two things? Well, maybe you would combine two different ways of doing contrast to come up with a new way, or you do some sort of combination of masking and being able to isolate parts of an image with some color change or something like that. But the idea is simply that let's learn about it, let's learn the nuts and bolts, let's learn the deep parts so that we can expand our capabilities as artists and creators. So that's it for this one. I hope you have a better idea and feel for this whole concept of data and pixels, and in our next videos we're going to build off of that knowledge. All right, see you on the next one.